Welcome to The Friday Habit with Mark Labriola and Benjamin Manley. The Friday Habit is for small business owners, freelancers, and creatives who are ready to take their business to the next level. Join us as we discover how to apply the strategies we learn to grow our businesses, make more money, and live every day like it's Friday. All right, and welcome to another episode of The Friday Habit. We're here in person, which is always preferred and awesome. And today we have David Young, formerly of the Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young.
The famous Young.
Yeah, the Young that everyone remembers.
That's right.
Just kidding, he's not. I mean, are you?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of young jokes. I'm going to die young, all sorts of things. So
That's right.
We could make a whole show out of that.
I'm sure the young and the restless,
That's right.
That's good. But listen, you are kind of like a pioneer as far as like cloud computing and being kind of in the tech space before it was cool.
That's right.
And so I just want to talk to you as an entrepreneur, somebody who is a thought leader in the business space, and you've kind of seen a lot of people come and go in the industry, and you probably have a lot of good ideas around what it takes to last. And so I definitely want to pick your brain about some of that kind of stuff. And I know one of the things you kind of focus on nowadays, right, is trying to help people be efficient with like their software and other types of SaaS products that they use for their companies to help them run efficiently. So I kind of want to get into some of that too, because to me, it seems like there's a lot of waste that happens in the industry, or that silent death by 1,000 cuts. Like I have all these subscriptions to things and I'm like, am I really using these things? So, but I would love for you to take us back to that young little man in the plains of Texas, making his way in this world.
Yeah, well, it's been a great experience, and I wasn't always in tech. I grew up in Texas, as you mentioned. I went to college, and I honestly, in college, I wanted to be a classicist, which is a fancy word for I studied ancient Greek and Latin in college.
Okay.
And I loved that. And I still advocate when a young person comes to me and say, well, what should I do in college? If they're going to go to college, there's this movement now to sort of skip college and just go straight. I always advocate liberal arts, but in particular language liberal arts, because I really think it teaches you how to think.
Yeah, critical thinking.
That's right. Yeah. And you get to sort of see how everything's put together from a linguistic standpoint. When you understand the linguistics and the philology, which is a fancy word for, the science of words, then you begin to sort of understand how things tick. And I was good at Greek and Latin. I was actually going to go on and do a PhD at the University of Chicago.
Okay.
A Greek poet that I really love, that I did a lot of work on, his name is Pindar, and he's an epic poet, a Greek epic poet that wrote a lot about war and praising warriors and things like this. But I got a knock at my door at the end of my senior year from a Wall Street bank, and they said, we love hiring liberal arts students that have, your background and your grades. And so I went to Wall Street, and when I was on Wall Street, they're real big proponents of taking technology and using it as business differentiation. So they will actually write their own operating systems. The next computer, which is the computer that Steve Jobs did before he came back to Apple, was, sort of designed and produced in cooperation with Goldman Sachs.
Oh, really?
And so, that was very interesting. So they wanted me to come on board, and I went there and I started working on tech things, even though I had no computer science background, and, did a few things, and then ultimately found my way out to Silicon Valley, where I started, was the founder and CEO of a startup called Joyent, and we were the first to offer cloud computing to anybody. So this was before Amazon, before Google Cloud, all that.
It was like cloud, like what, like where?
Yeah, no one wanted cloud back then. But I had just sort of rolled off as the CTO at another startup that had crashed, and I was like, I want to do this other startup. And as I was looking around, well, what do I need? I need I need to rack and stack a bunch of servers in the
Hmm.
data center. I need to go get an Oracle database, which
Mm.
was really expensive.
Yeah, I bet.
There's got to be a better way to do this. And so, like any entrepreneur, I started a business and I had an idea because I needed it for myself.
Yeah.
And that's what Joyent was, which was an effort to provide a programmable over the internet data center for people. And it was very successful. We did a lot of really cool things at Joyent. We had cool customers that launched it on us, like Twitter. Twitter
Oh,
and
wow.
RX.com launched on us. The Facebook Developer Program
Okay.
launched on us. LinkedIn launched on us. Tumblr. These were all what what is now called Web 2 companies that were
Yeah.
looking for ways to just sort of get in there, write software,
Yeah.
forget about the back end, and we provided all that to them. And of course, the clouds become really, really popular and very,
Well,
very successful.
and I think we rely on it in so many different ways that we don't even think about how we rely on it. I think about with my iPhone, right, and iCloud, and how like all my photos and all my videos, like my entire life, like memories that I have that are important to me, like live in the cloud, but I never think about it because they're kind of like always on my phone. And they offload them temporarily when you're not using them, and then when you select it, it'll download and all that kind of stuff. But it's just interesting how integral like the cloud is to our life nowadays. And 10, 15 years ago, it was just one of those things where I even remember I was in IT for a little while, and the big server rooms,
That's right.
and it was just all the racks and racks of servers. And then there was that point to where VMware Fusion came around, and then you had these like virtual servers, and
That's
then
right.
all those started going away, and then it
That's
was like, oh
containers.
yeah, we were using someone else's servers somewhere spread across the world via VMware Fusion, and creating those hives and stuff. So
Yeah, and the cloud is sort of an interesting thing because it allows you to have an idea, and this was what really jazzed me about doing Joyent, is it allowed an entrepreneur to have an idea
mm,
and for, $50 a month could begin with all the different pieces that they needed to
yeah,
actually do that idea.
right,
And the other thing that was happening, of course, which you mentioned your phone, is our networks were getting faster.
yeah.
There's a company that is no longer in business. They were bought by Oracle called Sun Microsystems,
Yeah,
and they
they were
use
here in Colorado. They
yeah,
were down in Boulder.
great company. A
Yeah.
lot of really smart people there, and they used to have a tagline: the internet is the computer.
Mm.
And I think that's true. Is what we have now is with the cloud, we have people able to sort of get access to all these different nodes of compute. And now, with AI, with GPUs and graphical processors, um, large CPUs, and all this, and stitch it together, and for just sort of dollars, try an idea, and if it works, and you go with it. If it doesn't work,
Yeah.
you throw it away. No harm, no foul.
So when you started Joyent, what was the original? You said you'd kind of started it for yourself, like something that you needed. Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I needed it for this business, but then I quickly realized that this was a business.
okay,
And so Joyent, which was the cloud, and I and my team, we have a bunch of patents. We invented something called Node.js, which is used by everyone on the internet
yeah,
today. We invented a lot of stuff, but the purpose of that was now we have a business where we can sell a product to developers and
yeah,
infrastructure people. And that was very successful. I
yeah,
mean, it's now this year it's going to be $1.3 trillion in value, the whole sort of cloud
yeah,
infrastructure business. So everyone's using it. You just don't start a business
right.
doing anything but the cloud.
Well, and isn't where like Amazon's making money is like AWS, not
Yeah.
really Amazon selling products.
Yeah, that was a very interesting time because we competed against Amazon. And they used to say, "Well, we have extra stuff. You're buying stuff from our
You
store,
can get
but
movies.
we got extra. We have extra computers. We'll just rent those out." And of course, no one really ever believed that, but it was a good founding myth because it's like, well, I love Amazon, so I'm going to love their computers,
Right.
and they've been very, very successful.
Yeah.
But so have companies like Google Cloud and
Yeah.
Azure, which is the Microsoft offering.
Which
You know,
didn't Azure used to be like I feel like I used to torrent movies in Azure like in the early 2000s. It was like a
I
file
feel like you
share.
may have just admitted to a felony
I
right there.
mean, I knew a guy in college that used to torrent movies with Azure and
Yeah,
LimeWire.
make sure we cut that
Yeah,
part out for,
exactly. I already got busted with Napster in 1999. All right, they shut my account down because I got Metallica song on my server, and Metallica was going hard after Napster.
well, it's interesting you mentioned, Napster because now the cloud, there's a new sort of thing, and you learn in technology, if you've been in it as long as I have, um, that you're never sort of at stasis. You're never sort of saying, "Well, we've invented it all, and
Right.
we can't do any better, so we might as well all just go home." And now you're sort of going from hyper centralization to more the Napster model, where if you remember that we were all sharing music with each
Yeah,
other.
yeah. Distribution,
So
like
it was very
pieces of files.
decentralized.
Yeah.
And now because the networks are getting so fast, you could see a model where now the Amazons of the world and the Googles and the Azures start to move back out to the edge of the network.
Hmm.
I mean, for goodness sakes, I live here in Colorado in Colorado Springs, and I can order up from 3 different providers, fiber lines that are 2 gigs up and down both ways. I mean, that would have been a whole data center when I started
Right.
Joyent.
Right.
So the amount of bandwidth that's available out to homes and the things that we can do and the compute power that we can buy is really, really amazing. I think there's gonna be a tremendous sort of continuing evolution of the cloud as it sort of goes from data centers out to everyone's home.
And then the singularity.
And
We're all gonna get the Neuralink, and then we're
that's
gonna become one with technology.
Well, that's a whole different episode. The
Yeah.
tenocracy, right? We're starting to hear this word of
Yeah.
technocracy, of
Right.
the rule crassy. Here's my classics coming out.
Yeah.
Crassy, the rule of the techno people, the
Right.
people that are running
Have
technology.
you ever seen Gattaca? That
Yes.
movie, and that I'm like, we're getting closer to that, right? Like you're gonna be able to like have the gene therapy and the being able to edit all these things, right? And then it's the people who can't afford that are gonna be like Ethan Hawke, who has to pretend to keep up with everybody because he was born in the old world before they could edit his genes to be perfect, you know?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I used to live in Marin County, just north of San Francisco, and our county seat was the building
Oh,
where
really?
everything in Gattaca
Oh, that's
happened.
like a real
So
place?
it's a
It
real
looks very
place.
dystopian, like.
It's a Frank Lloyd Wright building.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
so
that makes
it's
sense
one of his
then.
later buildings, with the big circles and
Yeah.
looks like a spaceship. So it was very well used in Gattaca. But I think you're raising a very interesting point, and this is something that's really exercising me these days, which is technology can tend to be something that's for the elites
Mhm.
and something that's very expensive, very hard to adopt. So you have the inside people in Gattaca, then the outside people who can't or won't participate. And I think there's a very interesting trend within software and technology itself, which is this open source trend,
Mhm.
where everyone, kind of like the Amish, I don't know how else to describe it, but we all sort of come together to build
Mm.
valuable tools together.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't have been able to found Joyent were it not for open source.
Right.
Joyent allowed us to say, okay, we're going to sell our stuff over the internet. We're going to sell this data center over the internet. But what we were selling was virtualization software that was open source. We were selling open source databases. We
Mm.
were selling, Matt Mullenweg's a friend of mine. He founded WordPress, very controversial these days, but that was open source. So you
Mhm.
had this sort of radical idea that we're going to work together in a commons,
Yeah.
build these tools together. And then the way that we mix them, or maybe the way that we support them, that's how we're going to monetize.
Yeah.
That's how we're going to make money on this stuff,
Yeah.
rather than the old model, which is it's
Mhm.
proprietary, it's based on copyright, and that sort of lack of transparency to me is something that isn't positive,
Yeah.
especially in a technological
Well,
world.
it's like ChatGTP, right? Originally, they were open source, right? Or they were like a nonprofit,
Mhm.
whatever, and then they've kind of switched, haven't they? Like to be more of a for-profit business and.
And that's a very interesting thing, isn't it? Because now maybe from altruistic standpoint, but maybe just from the standpoint of competition, Facebook has been at the forefront of open sourcing some of their large
Yeah.
language models. You've got Olama, you've got the model that just came out of China. The name is escaping me right
Yeah,
now.
yeah, it's like, oh, the ChatGPT killer,
Yeah, so and I think this is all a very positive thing because when you encourage competition, you get better product.
Right.
When you don't encourage competition, when you
Yeah,
sort of have this idea that, you know, well, a central group of people is going to decide what the best product is and we're not
right.
going to have competition, you tend to over time to
Yeah.
sort of have boring
Well,
products.
look at the IBM, right? Like, they were the king of the hill for many, many years, and then Apple came along, right, in the
Yeah.
late '70s, and it became one of those things where it's like the 1984 commercial, right, where the lady's swinging the hammer into the big screen. It's like,
Yeah.
1984 is not gonna be like 1984.
And some are saying Apple's the new IBM. I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
from year to year, there's very little innovation that actually happens
Yeah.
with the iPhone and with the Mac and things like
And you've been in the industry long enough, especially in the technology industry, right? Where it's like you've kind of seen that though. Like everybody becomes the IBM, or that they become the thing that they hate, right? When they're young and scrappy and like screw the system, and then they become the system that they say to screw.
yeah, when everyone thought that Windows had a chokehold on the industry and they were taken to court by the federal government for antitrust, there's a famous point in Bill Gates's testimony where he says that he's convinced that at this time there are two guys in a garage that are coming up with some piece of technology that's going to kick Microsoft's ass. And he was absolutely right.
Hmm.
Literally at that time, Sergey and Larry were
Mm.
founding Google,
Yeah, in a
and they were
garage.
gonna
Yeah,
and they were gonna sort of shift the window from what was important, which is a desktop operating system running on a PC, to this sort of wild thing, which is a very valuable engine for finding information on this new interconnected internet that Microsoft didn't see. And so you can be almost guaranteed that companies like Apple, they say, well, Apple's one, they're the top, they're the best. Well, something's coming. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's what I'm working on, but something's coming that's going to disrupt that. And that's
yeah,
that's sort of a law in my mind of how technology continues to move forward. And that's based, as I said, on mostly open source. It's
hmm,
sort of a free speech thing where
yeah,
we especially in the United States, but in Western economies, we sort of value the idea that you can constantly innovate. We want innovation because we want the best product.
yeah,
And as I said, open source allowed us to found Joyent. Joyent's now part of Samsung and runs, if you have a Samsung mobile device,
hmm,
you're talking to a Joyent cloud. But, Joyent could only come to fruition and come to being because of open source, because of all this other work.
right.
And we took from that, we contributed back to it. But that's a key sort of innovation that the fact that we work together in a commons to sort of build these common products that I think allows us to get better products in the end.
Yeah, and it's just kind of fun, I think. And kind of we were talking about earlier off mic, just how there's good and there's bad, right? Like technology, right, has really lowered the bar for like in the music space, right? Before you had to find a label, you had to be a part of, big music. And then now there's people who create music, release it on YouTube, and get their stuff streaming on Spotify and Apple Music, and are making millions of dollars a year independently because of that technology. So it's like it's allowed more people to come into this space, for better or for worse. And kind of what we were saying, it's like, well, then on the downside of thing, it makes it so easy that almost like nobody has to have talent anymore in order to like create music. It's just like,
Right.
oh, I can just clunk around on this thing and make something, and then call that music. And so that's where I feel like, oh, I'm just getting old, because my dad used to say the same kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I'm not certain that we have more bad music. It's just it's easier to go and hear the bad music because it's
Better
easy.
access to bad
It's
music.
better. It's easier to publish that stuff. But
Yeah.
I think there was always bad music around, and there's always been bad software around, and
Hmm.
those sorts of things. But our sort of hyper interconnected world now allows us to discover things, and that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, I was
But
talking to a lady the other day, and we were just talking about how like when we were kids, I would leave the house like first thing in the morning in the summertime,
Yeah, yeah.
crack of dawn, I'd go out, get on my Huffy, BMX, mongoose. I'd be riding out in the neighborhood, and I wouldn't come home for 10, 12, 13 hours. I would just be gone riding through neighborhoods and dumpster diving and doing
Maybe
all
get
this
a
stuff.
bologna sandwich at your friend's house.
100% with some dry pretzels and just
Right.
mustard.
Yeah.
And then, I'd come home, and then it was like, oh, it's just, you could never do that. It's just so unsafe nowadays. And I was like, I don't know if it's, I think what it is, we have too much information. We have more access to all the unsafe things that are going on.
Right.
It's probably safer now than it's ever been, but we hear about all the kidnappings and all the,
Right.
things that are happening. And so we're more aware of it, opposed to it just being like, I'm sure there was more pedos and creepers out back when I was a kid, in the 80s and 90s than
Right.
there are today, but we just hear about it more today.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. Wasn't that cool, when you were a kid and summer came and the end of school and you just sort of felt like the world was in front of you
Yeah.
and just every day you're going to be out there, you know, taking your shoes off, walking through the creek, finding
Yeah.
all sorts of stuff out there. I grew up in Texas.
Okay.
So,
It was hot. You didn't
it
care.
was hot. There was snakes. We were down for it.
Yeah, so you're a language guy. I'm curious, is there anything meaningful behind Joyent, like the name Joyent? Is there some sort of
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Joy Division.
Okay, yeah.
So I wanted a name that had joy in it.
Great.
Joy is one of these things that people misunderstand. There's a great author, his name is C.S. Lewis, and he wrote a book called Surprised by Joy.
Mm.
And unlike happiness, where that's something that I pursue happiness,
Mhm.
joy is something that happens to me. And
Mm.
so I wanted the experience for customers to be a joyful experience where they weren't necessarily looking for this. And most people at the time weren't looking for cloud computing. They didn't even know that they needed cloud computing. But when they found it, they would have a joy experience.
Mm.
So is Joy Enterprise. It
Okay.
also turned out that Joyent, Joyent, was the old English way to spell the word joint, not the smoking joint, but
Yeah. Bringing two things
yeah,
together.
bringing two things together. I
Yeah.
thought, oh, well, that's also really
Oh, yeah.
appropriate because we're sort of bringing, the way that people do software development with a new way of
Mhm.
delivering that software to their customers.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's cool.
Yeah.
So when you were first starting out, did you have venture capital, or like, you had this idea and you went and sought and got money to like grow the business? Or was it just you and a handful of other people who were like, hey, we got this idea, let's do this?
Yeah. So at Joyent, I worked for 6 months with, as myself and my co-founder, and we did a product. We we worked on that product. We showed it to some people. We got a few customers, not a lot of customers,
Yeah.
but enough that then we could go and show some investors. And actually, our first investor is fairly well known as a guy named Peter Thiel.
Yeah.
And we said, "Hey, Peter, we think this is going to be the future where everyone's going to buy." And so he put in some money, and then from there we sort of grew the
Yeah.
business, got more venture capital, and ultimately sold the business to Samsung.
Yeah. So during those times, like when you first started out, obviously it's like really exciting and things like that. Did you guys scale pretty quickly? I mean, especially you're saying like, oh yeah, we're working with Facebook and Twitter and all these things. It's like obviously there's like this really large demand for what you guys have created, and so it's like you're bringing on new clients and things like that constantly.
Actually, when we started, no one wanted the product.
Okay.
Yeah, the only people that wanted the product were the porn people. And
Okay.
so, we didn't go out and try and sell to the porn people.
Right.
You can think of a cloud as sort of like running a hotel.
Yeah.
Just people come to your desk, your virtual on the internet
Yeah.
desk. They pay the $20 a month or whatever and then they go do their thing.
Yeah.
And but if we went out and talked to people, like we went out and talked to Visa at one point. We got to the senior people in the sort of development and IT part of Visa, the credit card company, and they told us we will never be on the cloud. And we heard that over and over and over. We are never, it's unsafe, it's
Right.
unproven, who are you guys, this, that, and the other. And I understand that. At the time it was rejection, it was
Right.
difficult. But in my experience, that's sort of when you have an idea, oftentimes in hindsight, if it's a really powerful idea, it looks obvious.
Right.
And so data centers over the internet, very obvious idea. But at the time, it wasn't obvious at all.
Right.
And so there's a lot of rejection you have to go
Mm,
through until you find that one or two customers that sort of say, you know, this could be very powerful for us,
mm.
and we have ideas. And I would say that for us, the big breakthrough was when we began working with Facebook. And Facebook, you know, we all know they were growing like gangbusters again, and they had this idea that they wanted to do a developer program where people could write apps on top of Facebook. And so Facebook had like hundreds of millions of users. They didn't have any apps. And we ran over to Facebook and we said, hey, we will give your developers service. We will give them, you
Mhm.
know, a data center in exchange for some, you know, some other stuff. And they said, let's do that. And so that there would be like games that would be written for Facebook that would go from 0 to 100 million users over the
Yeah,
course of a
Farmville.
far Farmville. Oregon Trail
Oh,
was one of
yeah.
them. I don't know if you remember the Oregon Trail.
Yeah.
I remember there was a funny thing where, like on a Sunday, I get a call as I'm driving across the Golden Gate Bridge from the mother of some kid who's in college, and his credit card had run out, and her credit card, her sort of platinum American Express had run out, and they desperately needed more capacity on the cloud. But they were out of money, and they were hoping to be able to go into the bank Monday and get the money. And so I said, "Don't worry about it. You know, we got you covered and all this stuff." But that's when we really started to grow. But that was after a couple years of sort of meeting after
Grinding.
meeting
Yeah.
saying, yeah. And I find that a lot of so-called overnight success comes after a lot of sort of conviction
Yeah.
and persistence, where you sort of say, yeah, we've got this, but somehow I'm not explaining, you know, it's not their fault.
Yeah.
It's my fault. I'm somehow not explaining to the
Mm.
customer, you know, what it is so that they say, "Oh, now I get it." Because they
Yes.
have no frame of reference.
Mhm.
They've never used something like this.
Yeah.
They're just completely it's completely foreign. And
Yeah.
everything that they're saying is valid from their sort of
Right. Understanding of
lens and
things. Yeah.
understanding of things. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, that's so true, and I think a lot of, small businesses, startups, um, they have a hard time explaining what they do, even if it's something simple. I even know for me, it's like here at Brand Viva, it's like, okay, we're a marketing content agency, right?
Right.
And to me, I understand what that means. But then when I say that out into the marketplace, people were always confused. For the longest time, content meant like blog posts and PR articles and white papers and stuff like that.
Mhm.
But in my world, in my lens, it was like, oh, it's podcasting and video content, training videos, tutorial stuff. But I had to overcome that where I was like, okay, I'm getting this question mark of like, what do you do? And so I needed to be more expressive of like, we're a podcast and video content agency that help, marketing teams create content on a consistent basis. And then it was like that thing that went off as like, oh, okay, good. And then it was easier for people to share what we did and drive business and grow things. But it's really like trying to figure out what that market message match is as you're kind of going through that growth period in the early stages.
Yeah, I was very fortunate to work with some folks that were very early marketing folks at HP. And we don't think of HP as being an innovative company today,
Oh, a
but
printer. But didn't they invent the mouse? Was it the mouse? Or that was Xerox.
Xerox invented the mouse, but they used to be very innovative,
Yeah.
and they had great marketing. They were known for their marketing
Yeah.
back in the day. Anyways, they taught me this lesson, which is you should always sort of figure out what is your single hill. What's the single hill that you're going to dominate that no one else can dominate in your
Mm.
way? And I've always found that to be a very um, important sort of question to ask because, especially in technology, it's very sort of easy and it's tempting to want to do, well, we're going to do this and we're going to do that.
Mhm.
And if they don't like this, then they'll like that. Well, wait, that's a mistake because
Yeah.
now, in the old Woody Allen phrase, I'm trying to ride two horses with one ass, and that's no good. So you have to find that single hill, and that's internal, and your whole team needs to understand that hill really, really well.
Mhm.
And part of that hill is your solution, part of that hill is your customer,
Mhm.
which is who's the customer that's going to be interested in my hill. Your description of your hill to yourself is oftentimes has no relationship to how you talk about that hill or that solution to the customer. And the reason I say that is because the customer doesn't really care about your hill, but they
Right.
do care deeply about their pain.
Mm.
And you have to sort of discover what's the pain? What's the pain that I'm taking away from them? And that's how you want to market. That's what I found is most
Mm.
effective. So I'll give you a concrete example. I'm now working on a company called Federated Computer. It's an open source based company. And the purpose of Federated Computer is to enable companies to be able to use open source applications. So instead of using Slack, they can use Element. Instead of using Google Workplace, they can use Nextcloud. And we've integrated all that, made it super simple for people to use. We always thought when we started the company that the benefits for the customer would be privacy and flexibility. That would
Mhm.
be really important to people. Why should I want to give my data to Google? Or why should I want to give my data to Zoom? We also provide video conferencing. These companies use your data.
Right.
Isn't that upsetting to you?
It should be.
It's not.
Right.
What we
People just want the
discovered,
thing, yeah.
yeah, what people want is they want good value, they want a better price. And so, that's something that the pain was not privacy, it was price.
Mm.
And so as you mentioned in your introduction, you know, today we sort of find in the cloud is so easy that we sort of have this cable television program where there is no cable television. We're subscribed to Disney Plus,
Yeah.
Hulu Plus, Paramount Plus,
Netflix,
and
yeah.
then suddenly our cable bill has gone from $100 a month to $1,000 a month. Well, the
Yeah.
same thing has happened in software.
Mm.
And so, what we've done is because we're using open source, we give people all those solutions, but for a much lower price.
Mm.
This is all just to say, that understanding what you're doing and narrowing that down to a single hill and then figuring out that single pain point for the customer is really, really important in
Yeah.
my experience in being successful. That doesn't mean that once you get both these things, you're always successful
Right.
because you and I have been around long enough
Yeah.
that even if I have a great product and I know how to communicate to customers, sometimes I'm just too early
Yeah.
or I just don't have the right time frame or maybe I get hit with a COVID pandemic or something
Yeah.
like this and it is what it is. And you want to be able to, fail as quickly as possible so you can move on to the next thing.
Yeah, it's like, I was a big fan of the mini disc player.
Mhm.
Remember the mini disc player? And, you think about, like, a company like Sony, they could have beat.
Great company.
Yeah, and they could have beat Apple to some sort of iPod type player, you know? But I remember it was like I had my little Sony mini disc player and I was like, I could fit 5 CDs on this little mini disc, and then I
Right.
got a whole booklet of mini discs. And then my buddy's like, "Yeah, I got this iPod and I can just plug it into iTunes and it sucks all these songs on." And you just think like the Zoom, there's like so many other types of things that happened where it was just like a timing thing, you know? It was
Yeah,
like
before
perfect timing, great marketing.
Before there was Zoom, there was a company called WebEx even I was talking with someone even like with AI back when I was working for the Wall Street Bank, we worked with a company called Magic Cap. No one remembers Magic Cap, but they had this cool little PDA, personal digital
Yeah, yeah.
assistant that had sort of a desktop environment. And one of their sticks was you could talk to it and say, "Go buy my wife roses," and they would, it would go out. There was no internet at the time. It'd dial up a modem and this and that, and then somehow the roses would show up. And it's like, oh, well, that's like an AI bot.
Right.
We've been working on these products, generally speaking, as an industry for a long, long time. And Sony was probably convinced with their mini disc player that they had cracked the code there.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, this is a format, and we own it. But Apple, they were lucky that there was a new hard drive out there that was, I forget the exact size, like 1.8
Yeah,
inches.
yeah.
And so it fit into that beautiful white box, the early, and weren't those disc wheels
Oh,
amazing,
yeah.
with the click? And it just sort of fit. So all the pieces that they could build a product that now customers wanted.
Yeah.
And so, that's another cool thing about technology in the business that I'm in is we get to sort of take these innovations from everyone, put them into things that now people have been wanting to use, but now we have a different way to sort of put it together so that people can use it. And we did that in Joyent, and I think that's what we're doing at Federated Computer.
Yeah, so Federation?
Federated.
Federated, right.
Yeah, I wanted a really sort of retro name
Yeah.
with Federated Computer. I wanted to express that it was reliable, so maybe a little bit of my experience with Visa.
Yeah.
But I also wanted to express the fact that it was, a federated thing is not something unto itself. It's federated because it has relationships to someone
Mm.
else. And so it's really critical to me for the sort of well-functioning future of the internet that it not be centralized and not be
Yeah.
controlled by, 3 or 4 big companies.
Right.
That it be decentralized as much as possible. It's not always possible, but as much as possible be decentralized, that it be federated.
Yeah.
And so, this is something with Web3. Maybe you've heard this, but where we sort of begin to empower people out on the edges of these very powerful networks to have the tools to sort of do everything the big guys do,
Yeah.
but using tools that are open source that connect with other tools.
Yeah. So for instance, because I think about this often because I love the idea of privacy and I love the idea of being the person in control of my data. And it is kind of unfair if you think about it, right? Like Google said, hey, we'll give you some email, we'll give you some calendars and a way to search, but you have to give us all of your data.
Right.
And then we're going to sell that for trillions of dollars,
Right,
Right.
right.
And I'm like, do I get a cut of that? Like, yeah, you get free email.
Right.
It's like, yeah, but you're getting way more than this free email from me. And so I've always thought like, oh, it'd be nice if you could use another product or go somewhere else, even for email, I'm thinking, but it's like, yeah, but then it's a huge hassle. It's like, all right, now I have to get a new Google My Business, and transfer my domain and then is this email service going to even be as good? There's was Proton Mail or something like that and some other, private email where they don't keep any of your data. But then it seems like such a headache or such like a cumbersome thing to do to try to like switch on to, because like everyone's using Slack. Like,
Yeah.
and all my clients are trying to invite me to their Slack channels so I can communicate with them. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm using Google Chat because it's free and included with my subscription, but nobody wants to use Google Chat.
Right. Yeah, these are in some ways intractable problems, but they are not everlasting problems. I mean, it used to be that you had to use Windows because everyone was using Windows.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, people, mostly developers, started to use Macs because they were better Unix machines. So there's, things will change over time. We're doing podcasting. If it weren't for open standards and open source, podcasting would not be possible.
Yeah.
This podcast will be recorded. It'll be uploaded to your publishing platform, whether that's Riverside or
Transistor. Shout out to Transistor.
Good plug. Whatever it is. And then that will in turn send an RSS feed to the big distribution companies like Apple and Spotify and Google. But thank goodness there's something called, the Podcast Index, which is another open sort of distribution platform. And the reason that's important is because
what's his name? He's
Adam
the Podfather.
Curry.
Yeah,
Adam Curry.
Adam Curry. Yeah,
Great guy, big fan of open source, and that allows us to have distribution and discovery outside of sort of centralized control. And again, we're having this big conversation, I guess, right now between the United States and Europe about free speech. And, who's against free speech? We understand that we shouldn't be allowed to do certain things with speech, but software is kind of like speech. It is speech. It's just a different form of speech.
It's a different language.
It's a different language,
Yeah.
but it's important that people are able to express themselves, whether it's on a podcast, and not be sort of censored by someone that, doesn't understand my perspective or my sort of message. And so therefore might cut me off for reasons that aren't necessary. They may claim that my speech is calling fire out in the movie theater, but in fact, I have a very important message to deliver.
Yeah, and that's for me. It's always comes down to it's like who are you to determine like who's the arbiter of like, oh, this is what the truth is, or this is what the speech is that's acceptable, because there might be someone on the other side of you that says, "Oh no, it's even higher than that." And it's like, well, then where do we draw the line of, what's acceptable and what's not?
So you made 2 points about Google products, which I wanna dig into though, which is we would never accept if the only grocery store in the United States was Walmart, and yet that's what's happening to email.
Hmm.
Google actually decides what is acceptable and what is not acceptable in email today. And the reason that is because Google has a commanding market share in all email. There's 1.7 billion email addresses that go through Google.
Wow.
And so if they don't like your email, they'll throw it in the junk pile.
Hmm.
Now, there is a problem with junk, but the thing is, that's just sort of the way that they algorithmically determine. So if you're happy living in a world where everything's gray, everything's Google, everything's Walmart, then we should all use their tools and no other tools. But if you want a sort of multiplicity of voices, and I'm not, I'm just sort of saying the ability for you to express yourself, even just on email, then it's important that we have a multiplicity of things from a technology standpoint too. We understand this when we talk about trust and antitrust.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want a single company running all the airline industry. We don't
Right.
want a single company running, all the automotive industry or some other industry. And yet it's funny because we are sort of okay with a couple companies. We call them FANG for a reason: Facebook, Apple,
Mm.
Google, NVIDIA. Those guys have such commanding sort of chokeholds on their industries. And I'm not sitting here advocating for government intervention. What I'm saying is it's really in our interest
Yeah.
to sort of to buy local, if you will, to use that sort
Yeah.
of argot of the food industry. Now, you made another point about Google, which is it's free or it's very inexpensive.
Yeah.
Actually, this is also solved with open source. So, open source is free. You can get all these tools, you can run them yourself for free. You can self host, and there's a sort of growing movement to do self hosting. You've got these incredible fiber connections to the home or to the office.
Mm-hmm.
Why not just be your own data center? Well, we're not all equipped to be our own data center. So that's actually the business that I'm working on right
Yeah.
now, is sort of helping people to get access to these great tools, tools like Nextcloud that are used by almost 100 million people around the planet today. Tools like Jitsi, which is the basis for Google Meet. You use Google Meet.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why not use the free version of that?
Huh.
And, you know, Slack, there's a company that's a little bit intractable. It's a proprietary protocol, but there are other options that are very, very widely used, like Element, which is totally end-to-end encrypted. No one will ever be able to look at your messages and use it for advertising or training AI. And that goes on and on and on. But these tools can sometimes be difficult. So what we're trying to do at Federated Computer is just to make it super simple. And so
I
whatever the
love that.
size of business you are, it's $120 a month. So it's like, if I have 5 people or if I have 30 people, it's $120 a month. We can do that because we're experts in cloud, but
Yeah.
we're also leveraging open source, which is free, and
Yeah.
we're providing that benefit for all of our customers. But I'm not here to pitch Federated Computer. I'm here to pitch this sort of
Yeah.
vibe of
Yeah.
what's possible. I want a bunch of Federated Computers out there
Right.
because, like I said, whether it's with grocery stores or automotive industry or airlines, I want lots and lots of competition because that ends up bringing better products to the market.
Right. Yeah. Competition. And then again, right, coming back to that free speech, open source, I think it's one of those things where it's like a free market is one of those things where if you allow a free market to actually operate properly, it'll run really well, right? But it's when we get involved, the government, whoever, like when 2008 happened, right?
Right.
It's like all these banks got bailed out, and the free market said, "No, you screwed up, you failed, you should go away." But then we stepped in. It's like, "Oh, well, they're too big to fail, and let's give them money and like prop them back up,"
That's
which
right.
just keeps the system broken. Where in reality, we should have let them fall by the wayside, and then new, innovative, better ideas should have come in and replaced those things.
And I'm glad you raised
know,
that because those broken old banks are the ones that are like stomping on the new fintech guys
Right. Yeah.
that, if you've used a product like Mercury, which is a bank, an online bank, these are fantastic things, but they're sort of boxed out by the big guys, the
Right.
ones that shouldn't be around. And, technology is that in spades, which is, yes, the big players try to sort of figure out ways to create network effects where you can't wiggle your way in.
Or they just buy you and then just
And we
put you
are
by
for
the
sale.
waistband.
We are all for sale. I mean, that's an interesting conversation, but yeah, they figure out ways, but in my experience, they're rarely successful.
Yeah.
There's very very rarely have there been big tech companies that have been able to adequately defend themselves over time. It's an
Yeah.
interesting phenomenon.
Yeah. So when you sold Joyent, did you ride off into the sunset and take a break for a while? And then was there something in you that said, "Hey, I want to start something new"?
So I sold Joyent. I thought I was sort of a blonde-haired god, and so I thought
Is it blonde under there?
yeah, it used to be blonde, and I thought I could do no wrong, so I started an ice cream company,
Oh, a little Ben
which
and
was
Jerry's action.
yeah, it was, the worst decision of my life, but a really good lesson. Um, you know, first of all, food is really, really hard. A lot of people, we love food. I
Yeah.
love food.
Yeah.
Maybe you
I
love
love
food,
it. I mean,
and
clearly.
I love ice cream,
Yeah.
but, and I loved, we had milk from Jersey cows, the brown
Okay.
cows like that
Yeah.
you make fine cheese with. We made all of our jams and
Oh
candies and
my
everything.
gosh.
All the flavor
I'm
was
getting
from
hungry now just
huge
listening to you.
tea bags that we would put into the milk. Like we had a flavor called Whiskey Barrel, which was literally ground up whiskey barrels that we put in a tea bag. And you get that Jack Daniels
Wow.
flavor
Oh
coming out
yeah.
of the tea bag. No alcohol, but into the milk. But the problem with food is, once you create the product, then you have to execute, and it's
Yeah.
pure execution hell, where you're working with supply chains and all that. And
Yeah.
I found out quickly that I was not equipped,
And then the
sort of
profit margins on food are like
profit
razors
razor
thin.
thin.
It's like anything changes, just like, oh, this essential oil costs more now. And it's like, now we're not making money on that ice cream.
Yeah, but it was a good break, and in the process, so again, just like in Joint, in the process, I was like, wow, we're really spending a lot of money on these tools for the company for Honeymoon. Honeymoon, my partner and I, we ended up selling it to a co-packer, and the brand doesn't exist anymore. But um, I discovered there's some really good stuff that's open source, like open source office products, open source CRM for
Hmm.
finding your customers, open source mailing list managers instead of Mailchimp and these sorts of things. So I began to think, what it would be interesting if you could take all that and sort of put it together and integrate it, and that's the company I'm working on now.
Yeah. And are you having a good time? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I've tried as you intimate, I've tried to sort of um, sit at home and not do anything, but and I have hobbies. I'm a ham radio
oh,
operator. I love,
really?
yep,
Oh man, I've been because really getting into podcast was my love of radio, and I remember back in 2005, I was in the studio in Nashville, and I read this popular science magazine about the RSS feed and how you could do all this stuff, and I started my first podcast back then,
nice.
and because I had a mixer and I understood Skype and I had a mic and I could do all these things, it was like really complicated and hard. You had to route your audio in your computer using plugins and doing all this crazy stuff. But I love radio, and I've always thought like I need to get a ham radio. I got a buddy, my childhood best friend lives out in Kiowa, and
Okay.
I was like, if the apocalypse happens, like I need like a radio so that I can like call you on it and be like, hey, we're coming out east.
I Yeah, there's a real I think there's a real renaissance happening in ham. We always think of it as, and here I am with all this gray hair, but I've been gray like this since the early 30s. I got it from my mother, but
That's Ben. He's not with us. He's in Bali last time we talked, but he's super gray. He's all gray and he's like in his mid 30s.
yeah, so Ben and I have probably similar DNA, but people think of ham as being sort of filled with a bunch of old guys, but there's really a lot of new people, new young people coming
Hmm.
in, and it's so cool because you can talk to satellites, you can talk to Starlink satellites, you do all this sort of stuff, and you can sort of bounce signals around the ionosphere.
Yeah.
This morning, I talked with someone, somewhere in central Russia.
Wow.
You just sort of pick it up and you rag chew. You just sort of shoot the shit with them,
Yeah.
and there's nothing else like it.
Right. Yeah, that's so cool. I got these little radios, these Bofang radios,
Yeah,
and I had to go through the FAA to get my call signal and stuff like that, and
that's right.
so that was like my first little dip and toe, and I'll just sit there and scan, and just listen, and then I'll listen to the National Weather Service,
Nice.
but ham radio, I'll have
Yeah.
to
So if any
come
of
check
your
that out.
listeners want to QSO with me, that's I'm Kilo 5 Delta Papa Yankee,
Okay.
K5DPY. Those are my initials. But no, we were talking about, like being done with Joyent, and I have hobbies. I was saying I have
Yeah, yeah.
hobbies.
Sorry, we got derailed on the whole ham
Yeah,
radio
I
thing.
have hobbies. I like to ski. I like to get outside. I love camping,
To eat.
but I really like to create,
Mm.
and I really like. I'm very content, um, when I'm creating a product, and I don't like to do it by myself.
Hmm.
So in this respect, technology for me is a lot like maybe being in a band or
Yeah.
making a movie where you're
Mhm.
working with the same crew.
Yeah.
And the crew I'm working with now, a couple of them are ex-Joyent, so we know sort of what our personality traits, what our positives are and our negatives, and when
Yeah.
we're up and when we're down. But I like that sort of 0 to 20 people where you're working on something, you're showing it to customers, you're getting people to pay money for something
Yeah.
that just a week ago you thought was total utter crap, and now they're like, "Yeah, I could use this and I'll pay for this." And
Yeah.
and then you're improving and the sky's the limit. I mean, if you want to be a sort of creative writer, you can write novels, you can write short stories, you can maybe make some films, but technology is one of those things with creative writing where you could just sort of say, wouldn't it be cool if such and such existed,
Hmm.
and go do it. And you
Yeah.
go do it. You put it together and it doesn't require, it requires a lot of experience actually, just like anything else over time to sort of avoid certain pitfalls. But
Right.
I really encourage people, jump in, just and you're a seasoned entrepreneur yourself. You know how this is. You just sort
Yeah.
of have to get in there and get hit in the face
That's
and
right.
get back up. And
Progress over perfection.
that's right.
Do you find, because I love what you're doing now, and do you have a strong mission, vision, and value around? Because it's almost like you're the punk rock of technology. You're like screw the big guys. Like we can do all the things that they do, like in over here, and it's not going to cost you as much. And like, do you have a mission and vision around like where you want the company to go and like what you hope to achieve in the industry?
Well, yeah, and I always have to give the credit and the gratitude to the people in the open source community that build these great tools.
Yeah.
And I really see some amazing things, some amazing work. I was in Switzerland over this past summer talking with a guy that's now a colleague of mine at Federated. And this is a guy, sort of from central casting when it comes to being a software guy. But, he just loves this stuff and he works on it. And he said, I want to show you something. He came back and he had a mobile phone and he had written his own operating system for the mobile phone.
Oh
It's
wow.
just so there's the amount of sort of cool work that is going on in open source, and he's open sourced it. Um, it's just amazing. The really sort of altruistic work where people are just doing this stuff and giving it away because
Yeah.
they like working with other people
Mm.
and building something in common. I think that's really healthy for society. Now, when it comes to federated computer, I our hill is we provide access to these open source projects really simply. Um, and I want more companies, more people to be able to get access to these things. We've tried to be very sort of engaged on the pricing side so that no one will ever say, oh, it's too expensive. I
Yeah.
would never sort of do that. But we want people to get access to that. And what I've found is over time, when people start to use open source tools with federated computer, they start to look around and say, well, why am I using Windows? And Windows is really an interesting topic because it's great piece of technology,
Mhm.
but it's also very abusive.
Mm.
They now basically spy. They take photos of your Windows 11 desktop on a regular
Oh,
basis.
really?
That's the policy of Microsoft. And now they'll say, "We're using this in an anonymized way to train our AI," but the thing is, again, you would never allow that in a hotel room for the sake of
Right.
understanding better human,
Yeah.
or
We wanna make your stay better, so we're gonna
right,
be spying on you
right,
every 30 minutes.
right. So the thing is, it turns out that, giving people a great product at a great price, our mission, you asked about mission, is our mission is to get what we call the open source makeover for more and more people, which is, sort of discover for yourself the great tools that are out there. And yeah, you don't have to jump in completely. People have busy lives. They're not technologists, whatever the thing is, but there's always some really cool things that can make a difference and give you a little bit more freedom. It's similar to sort of, not to pat ourselves on the back, but what RFK Jr. is doing with nutrition and health,
Yeah.
which is like, look, we don't have to sit and eat a lot of processed foods.
Right.
We don't have to sit and consume a lot of processed technology that, yeah, it seems like it's an email program, but
Mm.
it's actually just a massive dragnet for your data
Right.
and your attention so that
Yeah.
we can build a better
Yeah.
advertising
You don't
network.
have to eat Red 40, you can just eat pomegranate juice.
Right, exactly. So that's sort of my analogies for what we're doing with Federated Computer.
Yeah.
And, I don't really think that much about the outcome or the exit
Mhm.
because that always seems to take care of itself in one way or the
Yeah.
other. As long as we are doing something that, the team is really, really excited about and,
Yeah.
we want to wake up and help people with this,
Right.
the rest sort of figures
It'll fall
itself out.
itself into place. Yeah, and I can imagine too just how exciting it is as far as like when you're able to solve a problem for somebody and them get so much value from that, right? And then it be so affordable. There's an element probably just like it feels very enriching to be like, yeah, like look, we could do all these other things. Like you don't need to be in the system over here, you
That's
know? And it's
that's
gotta be real
exactly
rewarding.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we see that with our customers. We have thousands of customers around the globe today. 50% of our customers are in North America, the rest are in Europe and Asia.
Okay.
And we see this over and over and over, whether they're lawyers or doctors' offices, or we have publishing firms, firms like yourself, all sorts that, yeah, you're right. It's always hard to move your house.
Yeah.
But once you move your house, why live in the slums? Why
Yeah.
be sort of renting rather than owning?
Yeah.
And, once people make that move and it's different. Sometimes it's just different. You say, well, this is not what I expected. But once you sort of find your way, inevitably we hear from people, well, now I have the freedom to sort of run my business my way. And
Mm.
I could start to think of these tools as tools that I can use to sort of differentiate myself rather
Mhm.
than just being yet another Slack or Google Workplace or, Microsoft Teams or, one of those companies
Yeah.
that, there really is no great opportunity to differentiate yourself with those
Yeah, one of
tools.
those apps that I'm so tempted to try is Notion. You know
Yes,
Notion? I don't know if they're open source
they're
or
not.
what,
They're not.
but they're like we use Asana here as like a project management tool. But it's one of those things. I mean, it's like $175 a month for the platform, and I use probably like a fourth, of its capabilities. Just like the pinky edge of what Asana could do. I just need to manage projects. And I'm always thinking like, maybe I'll jump over to something else that's cheaper. But it's hard, because once you're entrenched with all your projects and
Yeah.
all the history of the data and all that kind of stuff, it makes it different. And then even employees who are comfortable using, they don't want to learn a new protocol and have to create new systems and processes for themselves. So
And I get that, and it's very valid. By the way, the alternative we offer at Federated is a tool called Plane. So
okay,
like an airplane,
oh yeah,
PLANE
yeah,
dot app. It's great. It does project management, has Kanban boards, whole 9 yards. We use that to run Federated Computer, our internal business. That's
okay,
one of the things we do is we run our business.
On
on
all
the
the
same
tools?
tools that we
Oh,
tell
that's
people
great.
to use. Why not, right?
Now, what do you do though, like in like a small space, right? What happens when planes, the developer decides to move off to Beijing or something, and the app goes by the wayside because there's not a big corporation behind it, like making it go.
Yeah, so that's a great question. Sometimes that happens, but one of the things that we do for you is we're curating those choices. So we have sort of a high degree of confidence that the choice that we're offering to our customers, those are choices that are going to be
Like a
around
long
for a
term.
long term. This is actually a business that is established or well funded, has a lot of customers, and then at the end of the day, it's open source. So it doesn't go away just because the developer goes
Mm,
away. Many open source projects have been started by founders that started the open source project and then they went away but there's other people contributing.
hmm.
So these are sort of projects of the commons. And so in the case of Plane or Base Row, which is our no code database, these are projects that are run by their companies, but they also have many, many different contributors that are also in there. And so we think they have long-term sort of lifespans for their communities and especially for federated customers.
So with Federated, do you guys also like come in just like say if I say, hey, I want you to come over here, help me get all my system transferred. Like, do you guys do that kind of consulting
We
and
do that. We
helping?
also have partners that
Okay.
work with you too.
Yeah.
So our system's interesting. So once you change the password, once you sort of close the plane, so to speak, or you close the door to the house and you change the lock, we can't get in. We keep the software up to date for you. We do all that. We keep it backed up and all that, but we can't get in and see your. So that's designed on purpose so that if a customer wants to use Federated Computer, but they also want to use their own sort of IT consultant or internal staff, it all works for them in that regard as
Yeah.
well.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, listen, David, I've had a great time hanging out with you.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate you coming down. And I love that we got to see each other in person and hang out and chat and stuff. If someone wanted to get a hold of you and, jump into the free world, get unplugged from the matrix, what's the best way to get in contact?
Well, Federated is at federated.computer, HTTPS, federated.computer. I'm also on X. I have a very, very early Twitter account, like I think within the first 3 months of Twitter
Okay,
starting.
nice.
So that's at David Paul Young on Twitter.
Okay.
And, just reach out. Even if federated.computer is not the right solution for someone,
Yeah.
we help people all the time with other ways to get onto these projects.
Yeah.
And, the mission is to get people free and to get them onto great open source software.
Okay.
But it's been great to talk with you. I
Yeah.
appreciate the invitation.
That's awesome. And hey, one other thing before you go, we always love to leave people, starting off next week. You have a business, you are trying to do your thing, you're trying to grow. What is one bit of advice that you give somebody to say, hey, what, Monday morning, start doing this, or read this book, or start doing this practice? Like, what would that one advice be that you give to a young entrepreneur or a small business owner?
That's a great question. I'm just sort of sitting. I definitely have some habits that we have at Federated that come from sort of years of experience. We tend to do as many of our meetings on Monday as possible so that we have the rest of the week for getting stuff done.
Yeah.
But personally, especially when you're running a small business, everything's on your shoulders. And so one of the things I've learned is you can always spend 24/7 on the business. You can
Yeah.
always, but it's just not sustainable. So for me, I try and have a bit of a spiritual practice. And I'm not necessarily talking here about religion. If it is religion, great. But a good thing is to spend a little bit of time every morning sort of thinking about the day, maybe where you've messed up and maybe some of the things that you're going to do well and then do the same thing at the end of the day as well. Sort of, where did I mess up? What maybe I need to go to a colleague and say, "Hey, I sort of messed up." I find that sort of self-reflection to be very helpful because, look, we all mess up, we all make mistakes, we're all trying, but if I can be 1% or half a percent or whatever that right percentage is, a little bit better every day,
Mhm.
if I'm sort of, as you said, progress versus perfection, then things tend to work out.
Yeah, I love that. It's great advice. It's great advice for you. So make sure you check out Federated Computers, and I'm interested. I got some friends too, that they'd be really interested in this. So if you enjoyed today's episode, please like and subscribe. Head over to thefridayhabit.com. You can find show notes for this episode and ways to get in touch. At the bottom of the page, you can download our Friday Habit system, which will help you spend more time working on your business instead of always in your business. You can shoot us an email at hello@thefridayhabit.com. And until next time, remember, live every day like it's Friday.